the discussion about sustainable development and sustainable growth has gained momentum. The sustainable development and sustainable growth has also the human right angle. Now, in the international scenario, we find that the democratic system has been accepted as the best available practice of governance, mainly because it facilitates free exercise of individual rights. When I say individual rights, it encompasses all the human rights available to people in different systems of governance. At the same time, democracy will be meaningless without realizing human rights. If the people in a system are unaware of their own human rights, if they are left with a situation of no means to enforce their own human rights, there is no meaning for a democracy. Therefore, we can say that a good democracy, for that reason we call it a good government, is that one which will ensure the civil and political rights of its subjects for the purpose of bringing socio-economic change and socio-economic development in the country. If you look upon our constitution, you will find that the Constitution of India has recognized certain values which are mandatorily included in the Constitution, not only under Fundamental Rights chapter, but also under the heading of Directory Principles of State Policy and in many other provisions which are or which bear reflections of human rights. There are historical reasons for that also. We can say that the Constitution of India was deliberated, discussed, and enacted at a time when the international human rights document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was also evolving. So our constitution was more influenced than any other constitution by the human rights values and human rights principles. And we have understood, or we have realized, that good governance principles is essential. It is very much required for realization of all the human rights, including the right to be free from poverty, right to have satisfactory, decent, dignified livelihood and living condition for the subjects. So if you analyze the Constitution in its spirit, you will find that our Constitution itself brings in a lot of relationship between good governance and human rights. So it is the true test of good governance. If you want to test whether good governance is in place in your system, I must say that the true test of good governance is the level in which the realization of human rights take place. Realization of human rights include the realization of not only political rights, but also the civil rights, the social rights, the cultural rights, economic rights. All these things are included under the realization of human rights. So the question here is, are our public institutions effectively guaranteeing the right to have health, right to have adequate housing, sufficient food, quality air and drinking water, quality education, fair justice, personal safety and security, whether our system, public institutions and public system is guaranteeing the right to freedom, whether your right to freedom is suppressed by the public institutions themselves. If such any type of violation or suppression take place, whether there is an inbuilt mechanism in our constitutional framework to safeguard these rights, these are the true test for understanding whether good governance is in place in a system. So there you understand, there you try to integrate or connect between the human rights and the good governance. I just referred to about the sustainable growth. If you want to have sustainable growth, only infrastructure development will not suffice. No amount of industrial growth will suffice a sustainable, the purpose of sustainable growth. You cannot think of sustainable growth without empowering your own subjects before taking care of the people who are below poverty line, before taking care of the disabled, before rehabilitating those who have been displaced for the purpose of developmental projects, without taking care of your future generation by positive intervention in the child development activities. You cannot have sustainable growth without taking care of the large sector of your population, including the women, the children, the disabled. So these vulnerable sections, the interests of these vulnerable sections are also subjects of high degree in the agenda of good governance. So that is why we understand that good governance today means the total commitment and dedicated participation of the state in joining hands with the civil society, non-governmental organizations, citizens group, and individuals at different levels, interests at different levels, different stakeholders working in the system that they may be opposed to one another, but still acting collectively at various levels, from the grassroots level to the national level, and from there to the global level. Then you can say that there exists a viable system of good governance in our constitutional framework or in our national framework. So in simple words, in the beginning I said, in the simple words, we understand governance as the process of decision making and implementation of the decisions. Then when you come to good governance, if the decisions are made and implemented in a way that you will feel it as good, there we can say good governance exists. Other than this, there is no simple, exhaustive definition of good governance. Good governance is something which is to be felt, which is to be understood. Other than this, it has no exhaustive definition. At the same time, there is no delimitation in the scope and ambit of good governance also. So this concept of good governance has to be understood with great flexibility. It should be understood with great flexibility, because it is dealing with various stakeholders and players. It interacts with various concepts, like what we have seen. One of the concept, or one of the elements of good governance is human rights. The human rights and good governance is associated through another concept called rule of law. See, there cannot be good governance or protection of human rights unless and until there is due weightage for rule of law. And this is possible only through effective participation. When you seek to have effective participation by all stakeholders, you must also understand that you will have to encounter with the multiple actors. Then you have to understand and respect political pluralism. You have to understand and respect social pluralism. You have to understand and respect collective cultural pluralism. Merely saying that I understand and acknowledge will not suffice. That has to be manifestedly and effectively shown through transparent policies. So transparency is also one of the prerequisites of good governance. When transparency comes, accountability comes automatically. Individuals and institutions within the government system at different levels shall be made accountable through a process of accountability. When you make them accountable through a full flawless process, efficiency and effectiveness will come in your public sector institutions. The actions of the government will be legitimate. You will have, as subjects, you will have access to knowledge, access to information. You will have access to education. So, and thereby the subjects will get legally, politically, socially, economically empowered. That will lead to sustainable growth and sustainable development. So when I say like this, you will find that it's a very vast area. It's very vast subjects. No doubt it is very vast, but they are all interconnected. And all these elements which we have just discussed here can be approached or understood from the human right perspective. World Bank has identified or classified, we cannot say identified, it has classified different elements of good governance mainly into three categories. One is with respect to political regime, the form of political regime, how democratic your political regime is, how sensitive and responsive your political regime is. When I say responsive and sensitive, the voice of the unheard should reach the government. The voice of the unheard should reach the corridors of power. And the policy makers, the public officials, they should have due care and concern for the interest of the people at large while framing policies and making laws. It is not the voice and interest of the organized majority only shall be protected. Even the voice of the feeblest of the feeble shall be heard, and due weightage has to be given by the institutions, including the government, while formulating the policies and laws. And that care and consideration shall be reflected in the activities. That is the first category in which World Bank has identified. Second is the process by which the management of the country's economic and social resources are made by the government. See, you understand a country like India is very, very rich in natural resources, economic resources. We are rich in human resources, which is part of social resources. How these resources are managed? Is it managed and channelized towards the common good of all? Or the management of these resources are motivated and dictated and directed by vested interest of the, maybe of the corporate, maybe of the mafia, maybe of other interest groups. These are the tests by which the World Bank has asked us to understand the level of good governance in our system. Third category is the capacity of the governments to design. The capacity of the governments to design, formulate and implement policies and discharge its functions. See, the government must have the will to do things. It shall not circumvent its policies. It shall not surrender their will to any unwanted force. Let it be from within or from external or internal, from within or otherwise. It should have the will to formulate policies and implement the policies. And the government's institutions, public institutions, shall have the capacity to function, discharge their functions independently. When they will discharge their functions independently, when they are given in functional freedom, when the institution feels that we can discharge our functions without being oppressed by the governments, oppressed by the political power, without being intimidated by the power centers, then they will discharge their function. Let it be judiciary, let it be Vigilance Commission, let it be Election Commission. Any institution will be powerful when they have functional freedom. The functional freedom comes when they are not intimidated by those who are in power. So this is another level. So three levels they have said, World Bank has identified. One is, again, I shall repeat, one is the form of political regime. Second is the process in which the country's economic and social resources are managed. And third is the capacity of the governments and institutions to design, formulate and implement their policies and discharge their functions. So this is a very wide approach, but very, very effective and very much relevant standards the World Bank has prescribed. So it was again extended by Organization of Economic and Economic Cooperation Development. It also included, in addition to what all parameters World Bank has decided, they have added a few more things, just like democratization of state and legitimacy of state action. How far your state is democratized? See, you cannot say just because there is elections happening every 5 years or 4 years, whatever is the time as per the constitution of a particular country, you cannot say that the country is democratized. For that reason, you may see some of our neighboring countries which are autocratic in nature. They also have elections. There are certain, abroad, you can see the countries touching our border. They also have elections. Can you say they are truly democratic? I don't think. And how far the state actions are legitimate? When the actions of state are suspicious in nature, then it loses legitimacy. Another is how information is transmitted from the governors to the governed, the rulers to the ruled. It is possible only through free flow of information and knowledge, for which there must be freedom of speech and expression. The freedom of speech and expression is exercised through media. The media freedom of press forms part of freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech is not only a private affair of an individual. It is the freedom of the society to speak, not only to speak and express, but also to have information. That is why we have enacted the Freedom of Information Act, Right to Information Act, because the freedoms contained in Article 19 of the Constitution, especially Article 19(1)(a), will not be meaningful unless you have access to information. So the freedom of information and media is another parameter by which you can govern the level of good governance. Transparency in decision making. See, government decisions are not to be kept secret. Government should function with true transparency, because they are acting as per the mandate of the subject. They are functioning for the subjects. Then why there is secrecy? So decision making must be transparent, and every individual who is taking the decision at different levels, maybe from the lowest level to the highest level, shall be accountable for the act and omission at his level. This accountability I'm referring, apart from, totally independent of the collective responsibility of the government. Every person, every public official shall be accountable for its acts or omissions at his own level. Another element, another area or another parameter is the level of individual and group rights. If you feel that your rights are protected in your country, you are not persecuted, you are not oppressed, you are not intimidated by the power groups, your privacy is not intervened by government for its motives, except for the safety and security of the nation, then your individual rights are protected. Then what about the group rights? If you have a freedom to associate yourself based on certain interest and air your concerns, air your views, air your apprehensions to government, to which government is responsive, government try to redress your grievances or apprehensions, then we can understand that group rights are secured. Most important is the respect for human rights. All these things which we have discussed now are really directly related to human rights. Apart from that, we must understand how far the government respects the human rights. Do you have a human right law at place? Do you have human rights institutions in your country which are capable of taking the cause of the people who are otherwise disadvantaged or disabled? Maybe because of economic conditions, maybe because of social backwardness. So, do you have institutions who will take care of the human rights violations? Next is the security framework, the system, or the governments makes for socio-economic activity. Are the governments formulating policies by which they are able to secure equitable distribution of economic resources? And are the governments formulating policies by which they can secure social justice? So when socio-economic justice are realized through appropriate policies, through positive intervention, including positive discrimination, then you can feel that at that level, good governance exists, and providing socio-economic justice is also part of human rights. Another important, or one of the most important, two most important parameters are respect for rule of law. If the government institutions value rule of law and they function according to rule of law, all these human rights are protected. How human rights are protected? When you do all these, all your actions as per rule of law, what all parameters we have discussed here, that stands automatically realized. Good governance sustain under rule of law. Then all the human rights are realized. An ultimate stage of good governance is people's participation at different levels, which is, you may wonder whether people's participation is possible in a vast country like India or China. It is possible. Only thing is that government should have, what we have discussed earlier, government should have the determination, the willpower to make provisions and policies for that purpose. How people's participation has to be secured, and at what level and different, and what manner it has to be secured. So if we go through these standards, we will find that good governance embodies outcomes and process that conform to socially desirable standards. You require certain institutions, political institutions, social institutions, economic institutions, judicial institutions, other independent institutions who are free of political intervention, free of corruption, free of nepotism, and who are capable of working in a fair and just manner. Elections are to be held free from influences. Influences, I mean, maybe influence of caste, influence of religion, influence of money, influence of power. If, as a subject, the electorates in this particular state can freely cast their vote and give their mandate, uninfluenced by of external or exterior circumstances, then you can say elections are free and fair. Free media, individual economic and property rights are secured. Above all, a robust justice dispensation system. where your contracts are enforced freely, where your private property rights are secured, where you are not subjected to inhuman punishments, where third degree murders are not used, where you are, even a criminal is treated as an individual and his individual liberty and rights are recognized. Scientific methods of crime investigation is utilized, employed. Then we can say that there exists a robust justice dispensation system. It is not only with respect to judiciary, other institutions also, where your executive organizations, administrative organizations are efficient and they are capable of delivering equitable public service. Absence of corruption, that is very, very important. Absence of corruptions are precondition of good governance, and it is also a precondition for securing human rights, because in a corrupt society you cannot have a value for human rights, because human rights are always vulnerable for violation from the corrupt angles. That is why the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan has once said, good governance is perhaps the single important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. See, once you eradicate poverty and promote good development, promote development, that itself is sufficient to serve the purpose of human rights. We know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights
Anil sir, you are on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
I was on mute for some more time, or it got muted now?
Just few seconds, sir.
Okay, fine. So I'll again see the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Under its Article 21 speaks about participatory government. Under Article 28, UDHR says that every person has a right to have social and international order in which rights and freedoms can be fully realized. Once Article 21 speaks about participatory government, and Article 28 speaks about realization of the rights and freedoms which are set out in the declaration. Because that means that the domestic government shall make such legal frameworks which will give effect to the rights and freedoms laid down by the UDHR. Similarly, we will find International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It mandates that state parties to the covenant shall respect and ensure the rights recognized by the covenant and take necessary steps to give effect to these rights. Yeah. So it says that state shall provide an effective remedy to all individuals in their respective jurisdiction when their rights are violated. That means they should provide a fair and effective judicial administrative mechanism for safeguarding the individual rights and dealing with the violations of individual rights. Similarly, under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, it is the responsibility of the state to make steps to ensure that all the rights recognized by the covenant shall be realized by appropriate means. So if you take any international instrument dealing with human rights, you will find such mandate given to the member states, which itself links or integrates human rights with good governance. See, it relates to cultural rights, right to food, right to policy making, right to participation, right. So many economic and social rights, which due to paucity of time, it is not fair on my part to speak lengthy on that. So let us come to the again to the relation between human rights and good governance once again. Post World War, all the countries in the world has embarked upon the exercise of constructing democratic framework of governments. The concept of good governance was there right from the beginning, but it got more attention and momentum in the 80s, because this good governance concept was promoted as a means to address the failures in development policies and to address the governance concern. And one of the issues which was addressed in the as early as in 80s as governance failure was the failure to respect human rights. So right from that point of time, it has been recognized by the international community that good governance shall give due credit and respect for human rights, and to ensure that certain core principles have been evolved that includes the principles of participation, accountability, transparency, and state responsibility. Understand? Now what happens? We all know that human rights will strengthen the governance framework, so we should respect all the human rights and everything. But the modern challenge is that the post-globalization, government is withdrawing from key areas, and private players are starting to come in. See, not only in the economy, not only in the domestic economy, many areas. See, for example, health. Health is a sector where government has been neglecting or solely withdrawing, and the advantage was taken by the private players. But we have realized in the COVID period that it is not a subject to be neglected by the governments. Government's positive intervention in the health is very much essential for realizing the rights, health right of the people. So now the government.
Majji Ramesh, kindly unmute yourself. Thank you.
Now the government has started revisiting the policy on health. Now government is trying to be an active player with respect to health, so that health can be realized as part of the right to life. It is also a human right. Then, since more and more private enterprises are coming, we cannot compromise our human rights on the defense that we are not state and human rights are available only against states. Human rights are not available only against the state. Human rights are available against all the institutions, all the entities who are violating the basic human rights. Because basic human rights are fundamental in the governance of the country. Therefore, it is highly necessary to link governance and human rights. Three things: governance, human rights, and sustainable development. This has to be linked so that human rights are protected by every institutions which are working in the public sphere, whether it is a government institution or non-government institutions. And there comes the responsibility of government to make it mandatory in all the developmental documents that the human rights of the citizen shall not be compromised at any stage, and if at all any dilution or compromise is done, there must be effective repairing mechanism, just like we have in the case of environmental jurisprudence. So this participation, this linking of good governance, sustainable development, and human rights is possible only by promoting transparency in governance, bringing responsibility in government institutions and public institutions, and making public as well as non-public institutions accountable for their actions, and people's participation, because all the activities what the state take place, either through state players or otherwise, or through private players, the stakeholders, the beneficiaries, and the impact bearers are the public at large. So you cannot have any activity whatsoever, be its nature, without having due participation of its stakeholders. So good governance create an enabling environment and conducive atmosphere for enjoyment of human rights, and it shall in turn provide a platform for growth and sustainable development, and that should result in sustainable development of human right also. So I would like to summarize the relation between good governance and human rights, mainly in relation to a few major areas. One is the democratic institutions. See, we find that when all the democratic institutions, the government, when I speak about government, the legislature, the executive, judiciary, non-government institutions, all the public institutions are working in a manner where rule of law is respected, decisions are made systematically, properly, having great regard to its impact, and giving due respect to human right values. That is with respect to democratic institutions. Next is the delivery of service. The state is to deliver a lot of service. See, so essential services, the transportation, infrastructure, education, health, food, sanitation, all these things shall be delivered in such a way that the fruit of such delivery should reach the needy. It should be distributed equitably within the system, and any reform in the system, in the delivery system, shall stick to accountability and transparency, and it must be sensitive to sensitive to culture, sensitive to the policies and environment. And any change in the policy, in reform in the policy, shall not be made without public participation. So every aspect of decision making should ensure some or other way of public participation. And the third and more important is governance must be free from corruption. Corruption shall be declared as a social evil, and an uncompromising war on corruption has to be declared by the heads of governments. When corruption is eliminated, accountability, transparency, and everything will come as it is. So there must be effective anti-corruption laws and anti-corruption mechanism. And lastly, human rights and good governance initiative is possible when the institutions are wedded to rule of law. Rule of law is not only giving respect and dealing things as per law. It also includes creating legal awareness, creating legal capacity for legal capacity building for the people, and creating legal awareness among the people, and also bringing in law reforms. Capacity building exercise for the individuals as well as for institutions is to be made, then only rule of law can be strengthened. So under these 4 or 5 heads, we can summarize the relation between human rights and good governance. And let us hope that India, being an emerging world power, will take lead in realizing human rights through good governance, or rather good governance reinforcing human rights. So with this, I once again express my gratitude to the Central University of Karnataka Department of Law for inviting me, and also I thank each one of the participants for sharing their time and lending their ears to me in this evening through this platform. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Any questions, if you have, please. I will try to address it.
Thank you, Anil sir, for enlightening us with this topic and linking good governance with human rights and clearing us on various aspects. Like you said, the true test of a good governance can only be measured by analyzing that whether an institution, that is public institution, is guaranteeing its public the rights like human rights, including education, freedom, employment, sustainable growth and all. And by saying so, sustainable growth doesn't only mean the infrastructure, it also includes social infrastructure. Thank you, Anil sir, for enlightening us. I'd like, if anybody wants to ask any question, please either message in the group or ask us. Afterwards, please fill the feedback form. And I just want to remind again that without this feedback form, your certificates won't be given. So please fill the feedback forms. Thank you. Or you can ask questions one by one.
Ragini, it seems there are no questions because sir has given his lecture with very clarity and in a very understanding. So I think there are no questions from them. Sir, in fact, it was indeed a very good talk.
Thank you.
And you have covered all aspects of the human rights and good governance, and how this good governance is required for this democracy. Thank you, sir. And Ragini, you continue with your further proceedings.
Yes.
Yes, sir, I must say, you really gave a vivid picture of the good governance linked with human rights and covered all the aspects. If anybody has any question, please either reply in the chat box or ask. Otherwise, we'll continue with the Mr. Saurav. Saurav?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all. Myself, Rana Saurabh, LLM student of Central University of Karnataka. I deem it a great honor and to propose vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. First and foremost, I thank our resource person, Dr. Anil Ji Variath, Professor and Registrar in Charge, Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai, who despite of his busy schedule has found time to grace this occasion and enlighten us with his valuable knowledge. And sir, thank you for explaining about what amounts to the sustainable development in the governance. The way you connected the human rights and governance and the other concepts that falls under the governance help us in understanding the how to make a governance a good one. And also, sir, your explanation about the constitutional provisions, rules of law, UDHR provisions in connections with the governance by relating to them, relating to the human rights gave us altogether a new perspective. And thank you so much, sir, once again. And we are grateful to our HOD, sir, Dr. Baswaraj M. Kubakadi, and sir, Dr. Anant D. Chinchure, IQAC coordinator, for initiating this human rights law lecture series and giving us an opportunity to learn more about human rights in various perspectives. I thank all the participants, all the research scholars, professors of the various fields for showing their interest in this lecture series and participating in today's session. Once again, I thank you all for your attention. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir,
Yeah.
for accepting the invitation.
Thank you
I
very much.
hope we'll continue the similar kind of cooperation in our future endeavor.
Yes.
Over to
Yeah,
Ragini.
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please fill the feedback form. Thank you.